let's talk about the 19th century body snatcher, a figure known as the Resurrectionist.
We picture them as monsters, right? Ghouls. But is that the whole story?
To really get it, you have to understand the world that created them in the first place.
Picture the 19th century. This was the dawn of modern medicine, a wild time of discovery.
Doctors were desperate to unlock the body's secrets. It was the only way to move forward.
So, you had this incredible scientific ambition, but it slammed right into a massive social taboo.
See, people believed a dissected body was a desecrated soul, unable to rise on Judgment Day.
And the law? It created this completely impossible situation for doctors, a total paradox.
For thousands of students, the legal supply of bodies was just a handful a year.
So what you get is a huge crisis of supply and demand. The need was massive, the supply, tiny.
And look, this wasn't just some academic problem. We're talking about real lives on the line.
This crisis created a void, and where there's a void, a market appears, a shadow market.
And into that void stepped the Resurrectionist.
Don't think of him as just a ghoul. Think of him as an entrepreneur in a shadow economy.
He was basically the solution to a problem that society itself refused to solve.
So you have these pillars of the community, the doctors, secretly relying on the ultimate outsiders.
But how could anyone actually do this job? Well, it took a profound moral detachment.
First thing you have to understand, a corpse could no longer be a former person.
No, to him it had to become one thing, and one thing only, a product.
And its value? It was all about freshness, its teeth, and how complete the limbs were.
So the Resurrectionist had to perform a kind of dissection on his own conscience. It was an internal surgery. You cut out the awe, you get rid of reverence, and finally, you excise fear.
His job was to strip the body of all its sacred meaning, reducing it to pure commercial value.
They were the invisible and, morally compromised engine of modern medicine. Seriously, how could anyone do it? It violates this deep gut instinct we have to respect the dead.
Turns out, it took a completely re-engineered mind. These guys, called Resurrectionists, had a special mental toolkit.
Okay, so let's look at their first tool. It was all about creating a professional persona.
They came up with this cold, clinical slang. A corpse wasn't a person, it was a thing.
It's a psychological trick called linguistic distancing. You see it with soldiers and surgeons too.
And just like that, their jargon turned a horrifying act into just, well, another job.
On to tool number 2, an intense, almost obsessive focus on perfect craftsmanship.
You know, this wasn't just about dicking. It was a science, a super skilled technical operation.
Look at this process. It was all about stealth and speed. They could be in and out in under an hour.
By focusing on the how, they could totally sidestep the horror of the what.
All right, their third and final tool, a really powerful shield of pure cynicism. See, they were operating in a world that was just full of hypocrisy.
You had doctors condemning the trade in public, but then paying big money for bodies in private.
So in their minds, they weren't the criminals. They were just honest tradesmen in a dishonest world.
In that cynicism, it became their moral shield, the ultimate justification for what they did.
So when you put it all together, these 3 tools built a whole new moral framework.
Language, skill, and cynicism. That's how they re-engineered their minds to overcome that primal instinct.
You see, anatomists needed bodies to teach, and this demand created a dark, new supply chain.
This kind of work, it required a total psychological shift. You had to see every death as an opportunity.
And what's really wild is how they saw the world. Every little thing was either a risk or a reward.
So these weren't just common criminals. They were masters of a kind of dark social engineering.
And once that happened, the human body basically became a product with its own market prices.
But here's the thing, not all bodies were valued equally. Freshness was everything. That fetched top dollar.
They'd literally follow funeral processions. They didn't see grief, just a business opportunity slipping away.
So if freshness is the ultimate prize, why bother waiting for someone to die naturally?
And in Edinburgh, this cold, hard logic reached its most terrifying conclusion.
They figured, hey, it's way more efficient to just create a fresh supply on demand.
I mean, this was the end point, right? A mindset trained to see people only as products.
Yeah, this wasn't just a job. It was a life of constant, gnawing paranoia.
These guys stole bodies from medical schools, and, well, they were hunted from every side.
So what's the first threat? The most obvious one? Yep, other people.
If the authorities caught you, the punishment was absolutely brutal. But if an angry mob found you, that was often a death sentence, right on the spot.
To survive this, you basically had to develop the senses of an animal. Every snapped twig could mean you're done for.
But hey, the living weren't the only thing to fear in a graveyard, right?
You gotta remember, these guys were products of their time, totally steeped in superstition. So they had to wage this psychological war against their own primal fears of the supernatural. Professional cynicism really became a kind of armor against the terror of the dead.
So what was their single greatest fear? Well, it wasn't the law, the mob, or even ghosts.
Believe it or not, the biggest hazard of the job was the one thing they were after.
Yeah, the greatest threat they faced was the corpse itself. This is the ultimate hidden danger.
I mean, think about it. The bodies they were digging up often carried killers like cholera and smallpox. Any little cut or scrape on their hands, that could literally be a death sentence.
And that created this final, terrible paradox at the heart of their whole life. So you can see, their minds were trapped in this crucible of fear, just layers of it. Fear from the living, fear of the dead, and fear from the very thing they were stealing.
In the 19th century, medicine had a huge paradox. Society demanded better doctors, but forbade their training.
This desperate need created a grim profession, one that operated in the shadows of the graveyard.
These men became the dark solution to medicine's problem, a ghoulish but necessary evil.
Society saw him as a monster, but here's the thing. He was a monster of its own making.
And what's really interesting is the profound hypocrisy this profession exposed in society. The public wanted skilled doctors, but refused to provide the one thing they needed to learn: bodies.
So his gruesome trade forced a confrontation that society had been avoiding for way too long.
That fear of the Resurrectionists, that's what became the catalyst for modernizing medicine and its laws.
So you can see how all this pressure was building towards a major turning point for medicine.
The new law provided a legal supply of bodies, but only of the unclaimed poor.
And just like that, the dark marketplace he controlled was made obsolete, almost overnight.
But what happened to the man himself once his terrible skills were no longer in demand?
He was left with the psychological armor he'd built just to survive his gruesome trade.
And these weren't traits you could just discard when your whole profession disappeared.
He couldn't just rejoin the very society that had both created and shunned him.
His role as a catalyst was forgotten, leaving only the chilling memory of his work.
And this reveals a chilling truth about the power of supply and demand to reshape morality.
His existence forces us to look at that thin line between a grave and a resource.
It shows that progress sometimes relies on confronting uncomfortable, pragmatic, and dark necessities.
And that leaves us with a final provocative thought to consider for our own time.